Welcome to the Great Loop Radio podcast, brought to you by America's Great Loop Cruisers Association. We're dedicated to sharing Great Loop information and inspiration with those actively cruising, planning for, or dreaming about a Great Loop adventure. I'm Kim Russo. I'm the director of AGLCA. Today, we're going to talk about cruising Door County, which is part of Wisconsin, for those of you who are perhaps not from the Midwest and haven't been to that area, but beautiful cruising grounds that we got to explore some on our Great Loop. So that'll be what we cover today. Before we jump in, as always, I want to take a moment to recognize and thank our Admiral sponsors who support AGLCA at the highest level. They are Great Loop Yacht Sales, Passage Maker Trawler Fest, Skipper Bob Publications, and Waterway Guide Media. As always, we encourage our listeners and viewers to support these businesses that support the Great Loop. And with the sponsor recognition out of the way, I want to welcome our guests today, Pete and Cheryl Glassen, our Gold Loopers. We're talking about their home waters today. So Pete and Cheryl, welcome. Thanks for joining me.
Good morning. You're welcome.
Yeah, we're happy to have you here. It looks like a beautiful day in Wisconsin. Tell us a little bit about yourselves. And I mentioned your Gold Loopers. So tell us a little bit about your own Great Loop.
Okay, I'll start it off. We live in the Sturgeon Bay area, in a little bay just west of Sturgeon Bay called Little Sturgeon Bay. And I've been boating all my life, and Cheryl's been boating for about 18 years. I started off in a small 24-foot boat, and we moved up to our current boat, which is a 48-foot Ocean Alexander. Our kind of home boating grounds are Green Bay waters, Northern Lake Michigan, Northern Lake Huron, the North Channel. We started the loop back in September of 1921 and completed in roughly 2021.
Close enough.
About a year. And we did side trips to Nashville, the Keys, the Bahamas, and we went through Canada via the Trent Severn Waterway through the Georgian Bay and back home to Sturgeon Bay.
Yeah, sounds like you did a lot of the fabulous side trips too. But your home waters, of course, are absolutely beautiful. And there's always this debate this time of year as the current group of loopers is heading towards Lake Michigan. And there's always that debate of which side should you do, the Wisconsin side or the Michigan side. You can actually do some of both. But for those not really familiar with the geography of Northern Lake Michigan, let's explain Door County and where it is.
Okay. And I'm a true believer you want to do some of both sides when you do it. If you're only coming to Lake Michigan once, do a little of both sides because you want to see both areas because they're very different. So Door County is kind of located in the northeast part of the state of Wisconsin. A lot of people call it the thumb. We're about 45 miles by car or 40 by water northeast of Green Bay, home of the famous Packers. About 155 miles by car and 115 north of Milwaukee to give you a reference. Mm-hmm. County is bordered on the east side by Lake Michigan, on the west side by Green Bay waters, and the northern side is by the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Door County is part of the physical state of Wisconsin. It also has two islands, Washington Island north of Northport, and then Rock Island, which is a state park. The UP around us has Fayette State Park in Michigan, Gladstone, and Escanaba are some of the little towns there worth visiting. Kind of to get here, there's a couple of ways you can come across from Michigan. You come from Mackinac down to Beaver Island area, Grand Traverse Bay. A lot of people come from either Northport or from Leland. It's about 80 miles from Northport to Washington Island on the north part of Door County. Leland's about 63 miles to the northern part. If you don't want to go to the northern part of Door County, then you come into Sturgeon Bay, which you cross the lake. You can come from Leland or Frankfort. Leland's about 83 miles. Frankfurt's about 58 miles, but only 53 of it's open water. So that's the shortest way.
Yeah, and that's a great path if you intend to do parts of both sides of the lake. And if you're an AGLCA member, Pete did a great post in our forum earlier this week about kind of an itinerary you might choose if you did want to do some crisscrossing back and forth. When we were on our loop, we went after being weathered in for more than a week in Charlevoix. We went straight from Charlevoix over to Sturgeon Bay, which is a pretty long run, and in a faster boat, certainly doable. But I do feel like we missed a lot of good stuff. As I said, you've cruised Door County. It's kind of your home waters, but you've also been around the whole loop. So having experienced everything that's out there on the loop, or most of the waterways, at least, it's hard to experience everything. But how does Door County compare to some of the other things you saw out there? What are your impressions there?
Well, I think folks that have come up the East Coast will find Door County to be very similar in a lot of ways. Lots of small, quaint towns. It's often been referred to as the Cape Cod of the Midwest. Door County has some of the best, really, boating anywhere, like we saw, as I say, on the East Coast and in the southern parts of the loop. Nice, clear water, ports of call, very friendly. Lots of things to offer. Also, besides the docking at the ports of call, there are wonderful islands, little small islands here and there, and anchorages to take in. As far as what you'll find when you do hit land, there are museums and theaters and like lots of fun arts, music. In fact, a lot of people from the Chicago region would come up to Door County to begin to display their wares, kind of as a retirement thing for them. They would come up and start their own little galleries or do music at restaurants and shops. So you'll see plenty of that around, along with it being cherry land. You'll find lots of variations on wines, also vineyards, along with microbreweries and distilleries. The foods and restaurants, to go back to Dave Fuller, ice cream, are pretty
It's my favorite too.
Yeah. And it has a lot of kind of Norwegian influence going back to the settling of Door County. And in fact, you'll find one restaurant that actually has goats on the roof. So lots of fun things to do, similar to the Keys. Party, atmosphere, Chesapeake Bay waters. And in addition to that, as far as the landscape goes, it's historic in that the Niagara escarpment goes from Green Bay waters all the way up to Niagara Falls. So you'll see beautiful bluffs and scenery that you might not find in other parts of the country. Green Bay waters. If you're going to be on the Green Bay side of things, some people feel the upside there is that there's the waters are a bit more protected compared to the openness of Lake Michigan because there's nearby shores, lots of islands and marinas. So that's what you'll find in the Door County.
And it's known for world famous fishing, from salmon to trout, walleye, bass, and our famous lake perch.
Yeah, it's really kind of a fascinating area because it certainly has its unique flavor, even though in some ways it is very reminiscent of the spots that you mentioned, Cheryl. And you mentioned the goats on the roof. We're definitely going to come back to that because that is unique and certainly interesting. But let's talk about, a little bit, you talked mostly when we were talking about kind of getting there from the Michigan side of the lake. Will most people come into Sturgeon Bay through that channel there? Or you talked also about there's a northern door through the Rock Island Passage. Is one better than the other, or does it just depend on the circumstances?
Well, I always recommend coming into the northern part. You cut across to Washington Island. They have two harbors there, Jackson Harbor and Detroit Harbor. And from there, you can go up, and I recommend everybody going to Fayette, which is actually an old ghost town from the mining industry. It's got the beautiful Niagara escarpment bluffs there, but it's got the old buildings that they've restored, and now they have a full service dock there. In the old days, we went up and took 2x12s there and climbed across the posts to get to shore. So that's the best way for people that aren't interested in that. A lot of them are nervous about going 80 miles across the lake. Then they go down to Frankfort or Leland and cut across straight to Sturgeon Bay. And then from Sturgeon Bay, you can actually go north to see some of the towns of Door County. And, Egg Harbor, Fish Creek, Sister Bay are all good places to go. Menominee, Michigan. So there's, I'd say the majority of people go northern, but there's a few that are nervous about cutting across the lake, though. They come in through the ship canal.
Yeah. So, and I want to talk a little bit about, some of those stops that you just mentioned. It seems like the most popular stops tend to be on the Green Bay side, as you said, instead of on the kind of the open water. So, let's kind of take a cruise down the bay. Let's assume that we came in through the Rock Island area, as you suggested, and can head south from there. So what's kind of, the first stop that you would make from there? You did talk a little bit already about Washington Island. And for anybody who is listening in as an AGLCA member, Pete and Cheryl did a fabulous job of kind of putting together all of the information about the different marinas and harbors with phone numbers and everything. So I'm going to upload that to our website as a harbor guide for Door County, if that's okay with you, Pete and Cheryl, because it's hard to kind of dictate those phone numbers for the people who are just listening or watching. But so for members, we'll make sure we get that information to you because it's a super helpful list. But let's, since we're talking through it, let's start with Washington Island and kind of tell us about your favorite things about that stop.
Sure. Washington Island with the two, I'll start on the northern side. That's Jackson Harbor. You can get there through Rock Island Passage. It's a small old fishing harbor. They've got a town dock there. They've got a full service marina there with Shipyard. And Shipyard has transient slips, full boat service. They have a courtesy car, and they have a very good restaurant called the Sailor's Pub. The other harbor I'll talk a little bit about is Detroit Island Outpost is our favorite marina there. They've got courtesy cars. It's also where the Washington Island ferry line comes to the island from Northport of the mainland of Door County. There you can take the Cherryland tour and tour around the island in a golf cart, and they show you and tell you all the different sites to see about it and the history about the island. There's also bike rentals, moped rentals, UTV rentals if you want to get around yourself. And then Shipyard is a full service marina. They've got a courtesy car. They've got fuel there. That's the only place you can get fuel on the island and pump out services there. If you're one that likes to anchor, you can anchor in Peterson Bay, which is just off in Detroit Harbor there. The other place you could tie up is at Rock Island outside of Jackson Harbor, which is a state park. The whole island is actually a state park, but they do have a small dock that you can tie up there. Some things on Washington Island, like regular Door County mainland, lots of museums. There's a maritime museum, a historical museum on the island. Let's see, there's also an airport there. They have Schoolhouse Beach, which is a famous deep water beach. The freighters will tuck in there if the weather's good, but the beach is full of smooth, round stones. They actually have a sign in a deposit box. You can't take the stones off the beach, and if you do, there's a deposit box when you drive off to put them back.
I seem to remember that it's only one of 3 or 4 places in the world that have that type of rock and that smooth. And so it is pretty precious to the island and precious to kind of the world to leave those alone. Everyone visits there. It's a spot not to miss.
And it's for those who have never been to Lake Michigan or its beaches, its beaches are absolutely fabulous. And that's something that I don't think we hear about that often, but I was blown away by the Lake Michigan beaches and how different they are. And some are rocky, as you're saying, but some, have the white sugary sand. So yeah, definitely spend some time on the beaches there. I think I interrupted you, Pete. You were about to add something.
No problem. And actually, Washington Island also has the sand white beach there too. So depending on which island you go to, you get the best of both worlds. They also are famous for their lavender farm and shop. They have a lavender farm, and we were up there earlier this year, and the fields are all purple.
Nice.
It's just quite a sight to see.
And you get lavender soap, everything flavored lavender there at their shop. They have the Washington Island Skavkirke Church, which is a famous Icelandic church that a guy built out of wood that you get a tour of. And it's a special church up on the island. The island itself is very home to a lot of Icelandic type heritage people.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the ferry line names for the ferry, they're all Icelandic. Let's see, I mentioned the museums. There's Mountain Park Lookout Tower. It's the small hill. It's not really a mountain, but you can go up the tower and see the whole island.
Mm-hmm.
They've got a farm museum where you see old farm equipment that was used on the islands in the 1900s. There's actually a performing arts center up there where you can see music and plays and stuff. And they also have the requirement staples. Mann's grocery store, True Value and Mercantile sells everything. So if you need something from a hardware store, groceries, they have it. They have some very good restaurants. KK Fists and Granary Saloon are good. Carly's Bar, and then the famous Nelson's Bitter Bar. Now, anybody goes to Washington Islands, you got to learn Wisconsin history. Back in the Depression, you couldn't get alcohol, so they took up drinking bitters.
Making and drinking.
Yes.
And they were able to make it and ship it because it was used for medicinal purposes, according to them. So they still have that tradition. And when you attend Nelson's, they'll make you a card-carrying member if you have the courage to slurp down a shot of bitters, very similar to the Angostura brand.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like lots of things to see and do on Washington Island. How long would you recommend those coming through on the loop should plan to stay on Washington Island?
Oh, depending on how much you like on history, I'd say 2 to 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we always recommend you do one harbor when you go up to Fayette. After Fayette, you do the other harbor so you see both sides of the island and both lifestyles.
Okay, perfect. So let's assume we've done Washington Island, we've gone up to Fayette and back. What's kind of the next stop as you're moving south along the bay?
Then would come down to like Sister Bay from Washington Island.
Mm-hmm.
Sister Bay is the growing community in Door County. They've got the biggest growth expansion of any of the places. They have a very nice marina. They have very fine restaurants, and there's all sorts of entertainment plays there.
You might compare it to a Cape May or St. Michael's. That's kind of that everyone enjoyed those places, and it's got kind of that same vibe.
Okay.
There's also an island off there called Horseshoe Island. So if you don't want to stay in the marina and you want to anchor out, you can anchor out there and then take your dinghy into Sister Bay. They have a couple of marinas. They have fuel service, pump out. So that would be your next stop. And you could spend 2 days there easy.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And next, continuing south is Fish Creek, I believe?
Yes, Fish Creek is a small little town, very artsy craft shops, restaurants. They have 2 marinas there. There's also a bay and a state park there. You can anchor out in Nicolay Bay. And the state park is actually very unique. It has a golf course. It has a ski hill in the winter. And then in the summer, they have plays in the woods. So they have musical plays about Wisconsin, Door County history that you can go see in the woods at night.
And then continuing south, I guess Egg Harbor is probably next for most boaters.
Yep. Egg Harbor is another 10 miles or so south. It's another little town, a natural little harbor. They have a wine distillery there. They have a distillery there. They have a brew pub there. They have some very good restaurants, shops. You know, it's kind of following the typical Door County small town atmosphere.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that is so nice about the loop is you tend to be coming through areas kind of in the peak of their season. And it very much feels like that in Door County. It feels like one of those places that a lot of people are vacationing. So you feel like you're on vacation too. So we kind of named a few of the stops in Door County. Which one of those has the restaurant with the goats? Sister
Bay. It's called Al Johnson's. They're a Swedish heritage restaurant. They have goats on the roof. The roofs are all grass.
Mm-hmm.
So they serve Swedish pancakes, Swedish meatballs. They've also got a beer garden and a shop there.
So definitely a unique thing to see. A lot of folks told us to try to get there early in the day. I guess the goats are a little bit more active then. We didn't manage that. By the time we got there, they were kind of standing right by where I guess they let them off the roof at some point. Yeah. And I think the goats were just done for the day, but you could still see them up there. So really a neat thing to see. How's the restaurant? I mean, it's known for the goats, but how's the food there?
The restaurant's excellent.
Good to know.
Very fine fare, wonderful service, certainly well attended. So if you are in the harbor and you're looking for breakfast, go early, not only for the goats, but to get in and get out, and it's a great spot.
And then we recommend going on a weekday versus a weekend because there's not as many tourists there.
Good advice. And we did notice it did get rather crowded in Sister Bay in particular. So, you know, one of the nice things about loopers arriving by boat is that you can kind of avoid some of that because you're on foot typically instead of trying to deal with the traffic in the car. So the next step,
right across from the harbor, so it's a short walk.
Perfect. Okay. So we've hit Sister Bay, Fish Creek, and Egg Harbor. The next step you recommend is actually across the bay into Michigan. Am I correct about that?
Yes, it's called Menominee, Marinette, Menominee. Marinette is Wisconsin, Menominee is Michigan. It's on a river. Marinette is home to Fincantieri Marinette Marine, which is building new military boats for the Navy. And then Menominee has a wonderful marina there. And they have a nice downtown with good restaurants and shops there. So we always tell people, you know, it's worth the 15-minute drive across the bay to see it. And then from there, you can go to Sturgeon Bay because it's still only about 18 miles from there.
And how far by boat? How many miles across the bay to get there?
About 15 miles.
Okay. And then the same kind of making that triangle.
Under 2 hours, 2 hours or less. Fast boat, you can do it in under an hour.
Yeah, excellent. And I feel like that's a little bit of the path less traveled for loopers. I don't hear too many heading over across the bay. So I love that you included that stop. Let's take a quick break and play a message from one of our sponsors. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about one of the other unique things about this area, which is the fish boils, and then talk some about Sturgeon Bay because it's certainly one of the bigger towns in the area. So we will be back in a moment. Discover relaxation and pleasure at Saybrook Point Resort and Marina, conveniently situated at the mouth of the Connecticut River on Long Island Sound, just a quick trip off the loop. Only 90 miles from New York City, our marina offers world-class amenities and impeccable service for vessels of any size. Enjoy friendly concierge service, waterfront dining, a hotel, spa, and health club, along with on-site laundry, pick areas, complimentary shuttle and bicycles, and a courtesy car. Saybrook Point Resort and Marina is your destination for provisioning, relaxation, exploration, repairs, and beyond. Need strong, reliable cell signal on your next water excursion? Powerful Signal is your one-stop shop for the most powerful cell signal boosters on the market. A cell signal booster is essential while boating, especially in remote or offshore areas where maintaining a reliable cellular connection is crucial for safety, communication, and convenience. With 17 years experience and excellent customer service, Powerful Signal is confident we can help you find the perfect cellular booster kit for your unique situation. We believe in powerful products and powerful connections. Let us help strengthen your signal. Visit powerfulsignal.com or call 435-634-6800 to speak with an expert today. We are back on the Great Loop Radio podcast. Today we are visiting Door County, which is just one of those kind of magical places on the Great Loop. Our guests are Pete and Cheryl. They're filling us in on these home waters of theirs. So we talked a little bit about the goats on the roof, which is certainly something unique to see there. But another unique thing about this area of Wisconsin is the fish boil. And I think so many different cultures have their version of this. Here in Charleston, South Carolina, in the Low Country, we have shrimp boils, basically, that are somewhat similar, but just because we're coming from a different area with a different type of seafood. But tell us about the Door County fish boils. What are they and where'd they come from?
Okay, well, they came to Door County in the late 1800s. Door County was settled in the mid 1800s. A lot of Scandinavian immigrants came up here because it was good for lumbering and fishing. So they started as a local tradition to feed large groups of lumbermen, fishermen. Then the church started doing it, and they've grown and grown over the years. So the traditional fish boil in Door County consists of fresh white fish, and then red potatoes, onions, vegetables, coleslaw, bread, butter, and then they top it off at the end with some fresh cherry pie and ice cream. So what they do is they get the fish, they cook the potatoes, the fish, and the onions in a big kettle. You'll see it out on the back of the restaurant or in the front of the restaurant. It's a wood fire. They cook the potatoes, the onions, and the fish. And when the fish cook, they give off fish oil, and that floats to the top of the kettles. When the fish gets done and they're ready to serve it, what they do is pour some kerosene on it, and that kerosene flames up. It boils the pot over, gets rid of the fish boils, then they take it off and serve it to you.
So when we were in the area, go ahead, Cheryl.
I was just going to say, for people like me who are not particularly fond of the fish boil, the fun of it is watching them do it. And then when this kerosene thing happens, it's this burst of flame. And I never realized until we were pulling this together that that's why they do it. The flames take that oil, they move it off to the side, and it's like a theatrical presentation, right? It's so fun to see. And then if you're not a fish person, like I'm not necessarily, the ice cream and the cherry pie, because it's cherry from Door County, are really the top of the event. So
yeah, definitely something to see while you're there.
Right.
When we were there, we were told that there are some that are just real touristy and some that are pretty authentic. So what are some of your favorites for an authentic fish boil?
Some of the favorite ones, if you start at the north, Washington Island, KK Fish has one. He's authentic. He's actually a true fisherman. So as long as he can catch enough whitefish, he uses his own fish that he catches. Then Ephraim, the old office, or old post office office, well, the old post office restaurant. That's another famous one. Fish Creek has two of them. Fish Creek probably is one of the biggest areas for them. The White Gull Inn is famous, and they're actually famous for breakfast. They won Good Morning America's breakfast challenge one year. Pelleters is another one. And then a new one is called Kettle Black, and they do a Cajun fish boil. Then in Egg Harbor, there's the Log Den that does it. And then in Sturgeon Bay, you can get Waterfront Mary's does one.
Okay.
And oftentimes, the best
go ahead,
thing,
Cheryl.
Oftentimes the best thing to do if you're going to take that in is simply phone ahead. Sometimes they only offer them on certain days of the week, or they will have bus trips or tour groups coming through, and then maybe you can tag onto that. They don't generally do it, just for a couple or two, but it would be perfect for a group of loopers, for example, to stay and to enjoy that for the day, and they'll be very accommodating.
Yeah, that's a great tip. We've mentioned Sturgeon Bay several times, but we really haven't talked about Sturgeon Bay yet. So for some, this might be their entry point into the area. And for some, they may have worked their way south along Door County to Sturgeon Bay. But let's jump into Sturgeon Bay, certainly one of the bigger towns. One thing I loved about Sturgeon Bay is the cherries. And I don't just mean eating them, I mean the ones in the streets. So many of the towns along the loop have, their thing, like Norfolk has mermaids, and gosh, there's so many of them. New Bern has their bears, and Sturgeon Bay has their cherries, and they're all over the town, painted in all kinds of really cool ways. Just one of the unique things you'll see coming through here. But, talk about Sturgeon Bay and visiting by boat. I know you've given us a great list of some of the marinas you can tie up at, and we will certainly share that. What else is it that makes it Sturgeon Bay?
Sure. And depending on when you're coming through Sturgeon Bay, I know one year they had the cherries. You'll still see those around town. Local artists, groups decorated nicely on display. I think this year they had smallmouth bass.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize they changed those out.
Yeah,
they looked like permanent
some
parts of the city. How cool.
Bass. They try to keep it fresh so that people can participate. So you'll see any number of things and they're large, and they're on display at storefronts.
I think that's why I thought they were permanent. They are big and they are elaborate. You know, the groups that did the painting or decoration did a fabulous job.
Yeah, they actually auction them off each year to charity to provide funding. So each business donates it, and then they get prizes, and then they auction them off to people.
I love that. The other places I've been, like Norfolk, they're the same every year with their mermaids. But so very neat, something that they do there in Sturgeon Bay. So what else? Tell us more about the city.
Yeah, Sturgeon Bay is very rich in maritime history. As you may have noticed, and people that do come through the channel, the shipbuilding is, I don't know, Pete, you know how long it's been there?
Since the 1900s, there's been, you know, a dozen shipyards building famous schooners. Now they build commercial vessels, military vessels there, and they're down to one shipyard.
Yeah, and that history of shipbuilding is the reason that the canal exists, because they built it in order to be able to get in from Lake Michigan. Otherwise, it wasn't wide enough. So, you know, there's that. But the maritime history, you know, there's a new lighthouse that has a wonderful museum in it. If you're not over in that section, over, I think, on 4th Avenue is another maritime museum. And so you'll find good displays depicting the history of Sturgeon Bay. So let's see, I kind of, oh, okay, here we are. And while you're in Sturgeon Bay, there are things, you know, that you can do that are not only, you know, the museums, but there's on 3rd Avenue, a nice little playhouse that usually runs 1 or 2 plays throughout the summer. Maybe they'll change and be a different one into the fall. So there is entertainment to be had. One of the parks has a weekly free music, you know, where a lot of people attend, and that's a good thing. Restaurants, there are a ton of restaurants, most of them within walking distance of the marinas, some of them as part of the marina and others a short walk away. Bars and taverns, of course, it is Wisconsin, so you'll find those everywhere, and most people will also serve food as well. In addition to the shipyard that I mentioned, all of the marinas that you see around the country have travel lifts. If you had trouble with your boat and you have to have it pulled, well, Marine Travel Lift is a huge supplier of those travel lifts, and they're made right here in Sturgeon Bay. So you'll see those around, and that's a big part of the local economy. There are microbreweries, music, number of different places. In fact, I commented this morning on the Loop page. Pull up the Door County Pulse webpage, and you'll see everything that's going on in the area for activities, what's happening, where it's happening, the dates, costs, etc. So that's a great resource. As far as shopping, I know when we've had folks in at the marina and being, you know, harbor hosts, we've driven people to the West Marine, Ace Hardware,
Lambeau
grocery.
Field.
Yeah, and Lambeau Field is a short 45-minute drive away. So if you're inclined to do that, if you're a sports enthusiast, definitely don't miss it. And then Kim, you mentioned the fresh cherries. Every Saturday morning, there's a farmer's market in the heart of downtown Sturgeon Bay, and you'll find local good cherries, apples, cheeses, fruits, vegetables, and crafts. So there's always something to do. You'll enjoy it.
For sure. And that farmer's market was very big and fabulous. We enjoyed that quite a bit. So for our Packers fans, though, I do have to ask, you said it's a 45-minute drive. Is it something that people should consider taking their boat all the way down Green Bay to get to Lambeau, or is it better to go by car?
Yeah, some do take their boats. You can stay at South Shore or
South Bay
Marina there. And also the Green Bay Yacht Club is right at the mouth of the river. You can go tour. They have a nice boardwalk on the river with bars and restaurants there. You can tour Lambeau Field, Lambeau Hall of Fame. So it's worth the visit one way or the other.
Yeah. And for most boats, it's probably a one-day trip from Sturgeon Bay all the way down to...
Yeah, it's about 40 miles.
Okay. Excellent.
So
very
not
doable.
A far trip. The other thing they have in Sturgeon Bay, for Door County, is they have a trolley service. And you can pick up a trolley in Sturgeon Bay and end up in Sister Bay fish correct the other towns and get back here. So if you want to see the county but not go anywhere else, you can see it via the trolley system.
Yep. And we did a lot of our explorations of Door County by car instead of taking the boat, which works too. It's not quite the same feel, but you still get to explore the area.
Sure. And there is one marina or town on the Lake Michigan side that's called Bailey's Harbor. They've got a small marina. It's not the best for large boat, but they're very famous for good fishing, small shops, similar to the other towns in Door County.
Great. Well, and Pete and Cheryl have provided us kind of a list of the next stops after Door County. We're going to have to leave that part for another time. Most loopers will probably go back out through the Sturgeon Bay Canal back to Lake Michigan to continue that journey southward towards Chicago. But before we wrap up for today, I know Pete and Cheryl, you had some boating tips, because Lake Michigan is something that gives some of us pause if we're not haven't been on the Great Lakes before. So what are some of the general tips you have for dealing with Lake Michigan?
I guess the first thing, Lake Michigan and Lake Huron really aren't as bad as you guys make it out to be. For us, we had more fear of the Gulf of Mexico or crossing the Atlantic Ocean. But I mean, if you look at Lake Michigan, you get across, it's a short distance, kind of like going Fort Lauderdale to Bimini. The thing with Michigan is you want to be patient. Pick a good weather day. Watch the weather, okay? Because it can change quickly, okay? Use the waterway guide for information about the areas. If you look at the water, generally it's a shorter wave. It can be more choppy. And if you're in a trawler and you get it on your beam, you can roll a lot and it's not much fun. So, you know, depending on the direction you're going, pick your weather window, pick your wind window. You know, for us, we go slow. If you have a 2 foot seas and you're in the trough, you roll a lot and it's no fun. But if we're going on the bow, we don't even notice it. So be aware of the direction, the wind, the waves. Call your local harbor host and they'll tell you what they think and look at it, okay? And then make a decision, is it go or no go?
Yeah, and I think that calling the local harbor host is the great advice. And we did that some on Lake Michigan on days that we thought looked good. And we talked to local harbor hosts and they were like, no, this is not your day. Be more patient. And we did. So great advice. Pete and Cheryl, I want to thank you for sharing all these details about kind of your home waters. It's always great to talk to locals because they have all of the best tips. So thank you for joining us and sharing. We really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And thanks to everyone who's watched or listened this week. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Great Loop Radio podcast. Until then, safe cruising.